I found the higher my testosterone and the more healthy I become, the more desensitized I've become to things that would otherwise try and trigger me, or try and provoke me in a way. Having a brotherhood, generally speaking, is phenomenal, not only for accountability, and it can be physical accountability in terms of, like in your case, jiu-jitsu or whatever, but also like emotional accountability. Like, we're living in this world where as men we're being conditioned that vulnerability is strength. I definitely challenge that on the basis that I think as men it's important to be vulnerable, but I think it's important to be vulnerable with other men.
Simmo, what's up, brother? Glad to have you on the podcast. I was asking a bunch of people about who I should talk with about boosting testosterone, and I wasn't familiar with your work ahead of time, but I had a lot of people suggest that I should reach out to you. So I'm glad we could make this work.
Yeah, great to be on, Ryan. Looking forward to it.
How did you get into this work? Is it something that I know you're a cancer survivor, if I understand. Did it have to do with that? A lot of the times people find their path through the challenges and hardships that they deal with in life.
That was the key catalyst. So 10 years ago, I got testicular cancer, and I was 20 at the time. And that sent me down a path because it knocked me so badly. I then had to find a way to try and cultivate vitality naturally, because the system or the conventional ways of doing things just they kept letting me down. Despite my best efforts and despite their best intentions. So there was 5 or 6 years of navigating and weaving through these different pieces of advice or specialist consults on hormones, health, all the rest of it, and nothing seemed to give me the sustainable results that I was looking for. And that's how that was kind of the key basis of what I built the system on now, was kind of that journey of being so disenfranchised with the whole experience I had then to now being inspired and empowered with the system that I have now that helps me with my own vigor day to day, but now I'm coaching guys on that as well.
Yeah, when you say the conventional way of doing things, I assume, tell me if I'm wrong, you're talking about modern and Western medicine, which is just give you a pill, give you a medication, and hopefully we can solve your problems that way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I went and saw one of the best hormone specialists at the time. I was in London and spent thousands of dollars on this guy, and I had a blood test done, and my testosterone levels came back at 0, which was obviously quite alarming. But yeah. rather than dig deeper, immediately his kind of default knee-jerk reaction was, we need to put you on TRT and hormone replacement therapy. And I was kind of a bit like, wow, like that's quite quick, to make really quick. And I actually suggested, can we get another test just to make sure it's not an anomaly? And we got another test done, and it turned out my testosterone levels were lower than ideal, but I had more testosterone than we initially thought. And that was when the kind of the penny dropped, or I had that epiphany moment of like, if he's jumping to the conclusions as quickly as that to some pretty life-changing decisions, then I wonder, it just made me very skeptical about the whole process, or the whole basis from which he was approaching my case with. And that's what kind of ignited a light in my mind around maybe there's another way to do this. So that's when I kind of went down had my pursuit into all things natural and all things kind of testosterone optimization from a natural standpoint.
Yes. Do you think when you have doctors that take this route like you're talking about, and there's countless stories of things like this, that is it laziness? Is it ignorance? Is it appealing to special interests? Like, what exactly is happening that a doctor who has certain oaths that he takes not to harm people wouldn't look at these natural ways of healing themselves?
You know what? It's a great question. It's a great question because I like to think, or I like to tell myself, that any doctor or any physician or anyone in the kind of medical field is doing things with good intentions and in good faith. And I
think for the most part,
I agree. I believe that. I do believe that. I don't think there's anyone trying to be deliberately sinister or untoward. However, I think the problem is they're part of what I would argue I don't want to say a broken system, but I think it's not it's a symptom management system. It's not a preventative healthcare system or model, and therefore, given the insurance ties and everything that all the bureaucracy and all the red tape within those domains, their hands are tied. And I've spoken to guys before about doctors or physicians before, where they kind of allude to the fact that they want to recommend certain things that I talk about, but they can't because they're just not insured or they're not protected against it because the system won't let them. So I believe it's an old paradigm. I really think it's not allopathic medicine, or the conventional way of doing things, is part of an old paradigm. And I think things are now shifting. People are realizing that holistic health or functional medicine or whatever you want to call it is really where you get real shifts in your vitality and health from a preventative standpoint. I don't want to poo-poo conventional. I think it has a great place for like emergency care. I think it's phenomenal. I think it has clearly it works in some contexts. I think in preventative context and in some contexts that you and I are talking about, I think it's dreadful. I think it's not right.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine with your cancer treatments, I'm assuming you went through chemo and treatments and things like this. Is that accurate? Or
you know what? I actually had it as cancer goes. I had it pretty easy in the sense of I actually had I had a testicle removed. Not that was easy, but I didn't have chemo and I didn't get subjected to all of the radiotherapy that can be that can you live with for a long time and can be pretty toxic. It's not as if you go through those procedures and then you overcome it and then you're good. That's a traumatic event in all sorts of ways that you have to live with for pretty much the rest of your life. And I managed to escape that, fortunately. So from the point of getting diagnosed to the point of being told all the all clear was kind of 2 or 3 weeks. It was pretty short. So, but I had to sacrifice half my kind of manlyhood in some ways, which was
I'm sure there's an emotional aspect of that, not just a physical aspect too.
Huge. Well, as a man, like it's challenged my masculinity in ways I never thought I'd have to comprehend. And that sent me down a real torrid path in terms of my my identity. What I had I had battles with anxiety. I had battles with all sorts of emotional torment that came from that point as a catalyst, and it took me a while to really cultivate some resilience to overcome that, which was a real journey, and it was testing to say the least, for sure.
Yeah, we quite literally call our testicles and penis our manhood. So right. I imagine when, part of that is removed, and I hope I'm not overstepping boundaries or anything here. I mean, these are important discussions to have, and I don't want to make it awkward by any means, but was that a catalyst or a reason for your declining testosterone rates is because of that removal?
Absolutely. I mean,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the prognosis is pretty good, generally speaking. And, having looked into this, like in animal studies, even when you've lost a testicle, like testosterone levels and hormone levels tend to be pretty similar to if you've got two. But in some cases, depending on how you live your life, depending on the context of the individual, their health, or a myriad of different areas, and sometimes you can be more vulnerable than others. And therefore, I just, as a guy who wants to protect his, my manhood, my masculinity, the drive, the motivation, all the things that we cherish and are precious to men, right? I wanted to make sure that when I found a woman and wanted to cultivate a relationship and have kids and the kind of dynamic that I wanted to make sure that I could bulletproof myself against that. And that's what, as extreme or as morbid as that might sound, that losing a testicle, it was kind of it was in some ways it was the biggest blessing for me, in the sense of I've since lived a very intentional life, and on the back of living an intentional life, it's opened up opportunities, and I've become a man I never thought I could. So not not that I recommend anyone listening to this or watching this should wait till they get pain to go and do that, because you should want to do it for other reasons. But I know for a fact that if I hadn't had that event, I would have kept living the way that I did, which was very unintentional. I was living an excessive kind of hedonistic lifestyle, and I needed that wake up call to really shape me. And it's a shame that it had to be that, but I'm just grateful that I have now responded in the right way, and I'm now reaping the rewards of living intentionally and doing the best I can with that.
I mean, that's a really honorable way to look at it, and I think it would be easy to go the other way. I actually have two other friends who have undergone the same surgery, and so I know a little bit just based on my experience with them how that would impact. I do want to get into that in a minute, but what was interesting, to go back to what we were talking about with doctors, is I also believe that most doctors, the overwhelming majority of doctors, are in the practice for the right reason, doing the right thing. They have noble intentions, but they're hamstringed. I see this with school teachers as well. They get into education to inspire and motivate and teach our youth, but then they get bogged down with bureaucracy and red tape and bull crap. But that said, I think if you're going to enter an industry like that, you also have a responsibility to fight against what you know is not going to be in the best interest of your patients, or in the case of school teachers, your pupils.
Right. Exactly. Right. I mean, exactly. Don't hate the player, hate the game. It's the system that I think is rotten in many ways. And I think, with the whole COVID situation and everything that happened with that, I think a lot of people are now waking up to the realization that the premise of these systems may not be what we've always been told, and I think people are realizing there's more that meets the eye with a lot of this stuff, and maybe that pharmaceutical companies and these huge multi-billion conglomerates, maybe they don't have your best intentions, and I think a lot more and more people are waking up to that. And I think that's great. I think it's really exciting, because I think in today's world, it's quite easy to get into kind of the doom and gloom of what's going on. And I don't want to digress. And I know this isn't a political podcast, but I think, it's important to have a critical eye, and I think that will serve you very well. And I think I think we just need to be vigilant to taking things at first glance and not blindly just accepting things, in the case of medical situations or anything, getting second opinions. If you're getting a conventional opinion, maybe get a naturopathic opinion or a holistic opinion, just so that you've got multiple different sides to how you can go and treat your issue. And I think that's going to be a wise thing. I think being dogmatic in any case is not going to serve you, and can be detrimental in many ways. But I empathize with people, because I've been in that space. Like when the cancer came, I considered myself very brainwashed, or I considered myself I only knew the medical reality that I knew at the time. I only knew that there was conventional medicine, and so you only proceed on what
how
you
would
know.
You know anything
right?
Different?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, you can't kick yourself. We're all doing the best with what we know at the time. But I do think if anyone's listening to us or watching this, I just think it's important that you just keep a vigilant eye, keep an open mind, and be critical, and just make sure that the advice you're getting, is well rounded as you can get, as opposed to just relying on one person. It's really important.
So when you got this second blood test, what were your testosterone rates at that point?
Yeah, so initially, I had it done in the UK, although I base myself a lot in the US now. It was initially zeroed, and I had the rates back, it was about 11 nanomoles, which in the US units would be something like 150 to 200.
Okay, got
so
it.
It was low. Yeah. For 2021, like a fifth of what it should be, right? So it was bad. At the time I didn't know, I had no idea about the importance of hormone optimization and the power of hormones and what they can do in terms of your mood and your persona and the way that you want to live your life. I had no idea, you hear that testosterone is related to a lot of masculine traits, but now, when you dig into it, there's like DHT, there's all sorts of different hormones. But yeah, at the time it was more of a case of I was very unhealthy, had a set of very toxic habits and ways that I was living. And that was, at the time, that was the particular marker that made me realize, oh, wow, like if he's proceeding on the basis with the recommendations he is on an anomaly, which turned out to be an anomaly and an exception, then I wonder if the system's doing this across the board. And then you've got the whole rabbit hole of blood tests themselves, with regards to the way blood tests are done. A lot of people believe that they're inherently objective, and that's not the case.
Right.
Like depending on the time of day you take it, depending on the way that they're testing it, there's different modes of testing. There's a lot of nuance, and I think I'm a big fan within my coaching. I'm a big fan of, like, subjectively you can understand quite quickly whether someone's well or not using various different subjective markers, which have actually been proven in terms of, there is studies that show self-reported analysis in terms of how you feel in certain aspects can be as credible, if not more credible, than getting blood tests. So I do think, again, it comes to this point, like vigilant eye, critical mind, and realizing that there may be more views, compelling views to a situation that we want to account for that are also really important.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about blood tests, and I found this out relatively recently, is that it's not really a great, to your point, subjective indicator, or it's subjective. It's not an objective indicator.
Yes,
so if you look at
right.
testosterone rates or the scale or the recommended place you should be, as I understand it, you know more about this than I do. It's not really an objective standard of what is a healthy level of testosterone based on your age and other factors. It's what is it relative to everybody else, and everybody else is unhealthy. Right. So even the healthiest markers, I would assume, are not as good as they otherwise could be because you're drawing from an unhealthy sample size.
Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, the spectrum now of what's considered normal is something like, I mean, depending on the practice or the physician you use, is something like 200 to 600. Whereas 50 years ago it was 500-600 to 1,500. So they've almost shifted in response to society. People are more sick, more fat than we've ever been, and that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's a shame. But also you've got the nuance of I don't know, Alex Hormozy famously came out recently, and he said he had a testosterone level of 124, I think, and he's absolutely jacked. He's tanked. And a lot of people are asking questions around, well, how come his testosterone level is so low, yet he looks so visibly jacked and so driven, and all the traits that we associate with a high testosterone man. And I think it's fascinating. Right. Now we're learning about, like, androgen receptor sensitivity. It's like, well, even if you have low T, because if you've got highly sensitized receptors, androgen receptors, it means that your body's able to utilize that T better than someone that has desensitized receptors. So it's like, maybe low T maybe it's not a case of low T is inherently bad, and maybe it's nuanced around, well, if you've got low T and you've got desensitized receptors, then it's bad, and so there's just so much nuance with this stuff, and it becomes a bottomless pit. And when it's someone trying to research what to do or where to get advice or what action to take, it's difficult. It's really difficult, and there's a lot of people out there. I think there's a lot of influencer types or experts, and again, I think a lot of them have good intentions, but they're only giving advice based on what they know. And I've seen some quotes from people like Gary Brecker and Huberman and all these guys that a lot of people put on a pedestal, and rightly so. I think they say a lot of fantastic stuff, but some of their stuff, I do think is dubious, and I do think it's, again, taking what resonates and then challenging that and making sure that you do your own research and really make sure that it stacks up to your own interpretation. Because it's very easy in a podcast domain like you and I now, I'm by myself, so I don't have someone next to me scrutinizing what I'm saying. So it makes it very easy for me to propagate. You will. and I'm sure you've dealt with it. Well, yeah, it happens, right? But again, like Huberman, Brecker, all these guys tend to be on by themselves, and it's very easy just to say these grandiose, very elaborate ways of doing things. And Joe Rogan, who I love and respect, he's brilliant, but I do think they get a good time, and I think it's at the expense sometimes of the consumer who's trying to learn. It's like, well, if you had multiple people on, I just think you'd get a much better insight. It's the same with the news. We always hear one side, whereas if they had a Republican and a Democrat on, you get a much more rounded view. I think the same principle needs to be applied to podcasts and all the rest of it, so that people can actually be like, okay, well, I resonate with that. I don't resonate with that. Maybe do you know what I mean? I just think it would really help. It's a lot healthier way of doing it.
Yeah. To go back to what you were saying about androgen receptors, the way I understand that is it's basically the mechanism of the body that processes the testosterone to usable function. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's like one of the key driving factors of it, for sure. And I do think, where it's now starting to come out and become a bit more androgen receptor sensitivity, it's a bit of a mouthful, is the awareness around it is just starting to come out, which I think is great. There's Derek on, I don't know his surname, Derek, More Plates, More Dates, who's brilliant at, he's worth checking out if anyone wants to dig more into this stuff. Obviously I've got my own way
of interpreting
things. It's Derek, I don't know his surname, but he's been on Rogan a few times. He runs a health testing business called Merrick Health. Anyway, he's super switched on with all things hormones, and he opened my eyes to the nuance of the differences between free T and total T, and how to interpret the difference between that. The how liver function and thyroid function can impact T levels, and gut function, which a lot of these organs, given that cholesterol, 80% of it's manufactured in the liver, and given that testosterone is a precursor of cholesterol, surely it would make sense to make sure that liver function is operating properly so that it can create cholesterol, and that the cholesterol can then be converted into pregnenolone, and then pregnenolone can then be converted into the downstream metabolite hormones, and then you got testosterone. So I do think, again, in a lot of the testosterone rhetoric, whether you're on TikTok or Twitter or any of these platforms, it's like, boost testosterone with these different methods. And I think it's at the expense, again, of understanding, okay, well, if you think you have low T, well, then why is that? Because if you have low T, there is good science showing that if thyroid is inversely correlated with T levels, high cortisol is famously inversely correlated with stress, right? Exactly. Gut function. We're now learning about the power of gut inflammation and how that lowers testosterone. So by gut proving that it can lower T and high cortisol, you've got poor thyroid function and poor liver function. That should be the baseline, or that should be where people should turn to first at any age, before you then go and think about TRT or anything exogenous, because I'm convinced that in every case, one of those areas is going to be suboptimal, and there's some things you can do that would make a huge difference. And I think it will save you years of dependency, save you, it's an inconvenience. There's a whole myriad of issues that come with it. I'm not saying it's all bad, because there's some guys that clearly do well on it, for sure. But I do think it's part of a culture of this kind of instant gratification culture, this quick fix culture, that's like, oh, there's this thing that gets you these results and you can take it and there's no effort and it's easy. And I think, as a matter of principle, I think when anything's ever advertised to you as a quick fix, most quick fixes are actually long-term pain in disguise. But obviously they're not going to advertise it like that, because you're not going to buy it. But there's always a trade-off. There is always a trade-off, always. So sorry, I don't know if I digress there, but yeah.
No, I mean, it makes sense. And the thing that I'm thinking about as you're saying this is, there's so many different variables in the equation that when you do something like TRT or pinpoint a symptom and then treat that symptom alone, you might actually address the problem, one of the problems. But when you decide to engage, let's just call it healthy living, not only are you going to hit your improved testosterone, but your gut is going to improve, your liver is going to improve, your cholesterol is going to reduce, your energy is going to increase. And so the byproduct of you doing this the right way is not only are you achieving the result you desire, but there's a lot of ancillary benefits that come from it as well.
Right. Exactly.
So when you got this test and you were in the 200 high 100s, low 200 range, you had said that there was a lot of the way that you were living that was not conducive to good levels of testosterone. I imagine it had to do with probably alcohol abuse, probably sleep. What are some of the things that you had to change in your life to immediately start to improve those levels and in turn your health?
Yeah, so I feel like I was living I imagine a classic college lifestyle in terms of, eating junk, sleep late nights. I had a bit of a habit of partying. I liked my house music. So I was doing all of the kind of hedonistic things and, enjoying myself, having fun as you do at that age and what's kind of considered normal, not realizing how. And I remember at the time it's funny because I had these symptoms where and maybe it's a bit graphic, but I used to get like bad phlegm, a lot of phlegm. And I used to have I used to get ill like every couple of months. And I used to at the time, I just thought, oh, well, that's normal. That just happens. Or, oh, I have phlegm because phlegm's just normal. And I used to get coughs. I used to get flu a lot. I then had really bad acne. And I'm saying this because I'm now convinced, given now working with guys in my own journey as well, like, this is retrospectively looking back on that, like that's my body's way of being like, Simmo, there's some things that you're metabolizing in your life right now that your body's trying to tell you, stop. You should probably stop doing that. Like you should probably stop drinking, a quart of beer, or you should stop, eating all the junk, or you should stop just, rather than being unintentional and just being blind to it, just start like evaluating, hang on, is there things within my routine or my lifestyle that maybe not conducive to good health, and just starting to become aware of that. Because I had all of these symptoms, and I had tonsillitis before I got cancer, I got tonsillitis about 4 times in 2 years, which is broadly considered a pretty extreme immune response. It's like in lots of medical circles, they would say, that's quite severe. And again, I'm now convinced it's like the warning signs. We get these warning signs of your body being like, look, you are overloading me with toxins and I am struggling to cope. And therefore I'm going to give you these signs so that you can take action. If you don't take action, well, I'm going to give you, I'll then throw out cancer, or you'll get something a lot more severe. And I'm now convinced that, the cancer and what I went through and all the symptoms and everything that was really bad, it was a product of just overloading my system with just things it couldn't cope with. It just became overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I was drinking very heavily, for me, it was digestive issues and heartburn, like you wouldn't believe. I mean, those were the 2 biggest issues. And then, in stopping drinking, not only do you resolve those problems fairly quickly, there's a whole other host of issues that maybe you don't even recognize, like improved performance, increased energy,
right.
Better sleep at night, all these other factors that come into consideration.
Right. Exactly.
So you cut out a lot of your toxic lifestyle.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you began to incorporate through diet, through activity, through exercise, those sorts of things?
Yeah. So that was when I was 21, and then I kind of went on this recovery journey. And then when I started to retake action when I was 25, 26, 25. And that's when I started cultivating, in terms of the routine, was really understanding the power of, nutrition, whole food nutrition, what's kind of called animal-based, an animal-based diet. Like I did vegetarian, I did vegan, I did pescatarian, I did, I feel like I've worn all of the nutrition caps. And, I did intermittent fasting, I did all of these things. And then I then discovered Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan about 4 or 5 years ago. And he was talking, very eloquently about the power of steak and eating meat. And I was kind of like, wow, that's right. It's so kind of antithetical to the mainstream narrative. A lot of the rhetoric right now is plant-based, and I was like, at the time I was like, wow, like that's so radical. And so anyway, I tried it, and then it blew me away. At the time I had digestive issues that dissipated. I had some mood disorders, and those dissipated, and that was purely just from eating mainly steaks, which was wild. Which sometimes you might think that's hard to comprehend, but it really was really the kind of the big change I made. And then when I started doing that, I then discovered Paul Saladino, who at the time was Carnivore MD, and then he opened my eyes to the some of the flaws in the plant-based narrative that and then some of the strengths that weren't being shown in the animal-based narrative, and then on the back of learning more about him and his work, that then kind of validated some of what I'd seen about the Peterson podcast with Joe Rogan. And then just through way of experimenting with that, I then started feeling better, and all these symptoms started to get better. And then, and I haven't really changed much since. Like I've very much kind of stayed on that nutrition template since. But I think what was interesting, Ryan, is like, until about 2 or 3 years ago, I thought nutrition was kind of the be all end all, and I was really kind of fixated on nutrition being like this panacea, like it's all about nutrition. And I think in a lot of the health rhetoric, it does center around nutrition. And I think rightly so, because in most cases, nutrition will definitely be responsible for a lot of your change. But I think then I discovered Jack Kruse, who opened my eyes to the world of light and the power of light hygiene, sun gazing in the morning, red lights, incandescent bulbs, halogen lights, all that kind of stuff. And then, I discovered Paul Chek and the power of movement and the way that he advocates how to move. After the nutrition was really the foundation. And then I layered, and then once I discovered some other, what I can kind of consider pioneers in their space, I then layered that on top, and I realized actually it all makes a difference. And that's why I feel like it's really a lifestyle change. Like if you want to live healthily and you want to garner the benefits from living healthily long term, like you've got to commit to it as a lifestyle. Like you've got to curate a lifestyle in a way that works for you, obviously. But it's not a case of, I'm just going to have a healthy meal and then and then that's okay, and I'll just drink excessively and I'll go out late at night or whatever it is for you. Like it's a commitment, right? I think as men, given what you do, like I think as men, like discipline for me and integrity are kind of the two traits at the essence of kind of the masculine core. And I think if you really want to be truly healthy as a man, physically and mentally, like you have to start embracing discipline and really understanding the power of what discipline can do for you. And I really think at the core of everything I've done, it really stems down to discipline. That's really it. Discipline was really what got me where I am.
I watched this. It was a video I saw a couple of weeks ago, and it was this man. They must have been at a conference, and it looked like some sort of a church conference for men. Yeah. And the main speaker brought a friend of his up, and this friend of his was clearly a physical specimen, just big and strong and very masculine looking. And the other guy was not as masculine looking as this other guy. And he says, I work out with this guy. I train with this guy. We go to the same gym. We lift the same weights. We do all the same thing. Why does he look like this and I look like this? And he made the point that his friend takes the gym home with him, and he uses the gym as an excuse for poor habits the rest of the day. Right. But the friend says, hey, not only is it me going to the gym, this is just part of my lifestyle. I eat right. I get the sleep I need. I move my body. I do all these other things because the gym is important. I don't use the gym as an excuse to beat myself up the rest of the 3 hours of the day that I have. Right. Exactly. So yeah. Exactly. I think that's a great way of putting it. Like, I think that's a great example. Go on. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. No, go on. No, you go. Was it when you started to eat meat to the degree that you have? This is a little foreign to me because I've never had a problem with it, and I've always loved meat, and it's no surprise that you feel better. And I think most of the men listening to this are like, yeah, obviously you're going to feel better with a steak. Was that a challenge though for you initially, because you were either on a plant-based diet or a vegan or a vegetarian? It sounds like was that hard to make that switch for you? It was because there's kind of a social stigma to eating meat, particularly with whether you subscribe to the climate change, in terms of the climate impacts that are typically articulated about eating meat, but also, the ethical impacts with regards to how the meat animals are killed. So I remember, friends of mine, I remember, being somewhat of target of being targeted for it, for sure, from a social standpoint, but also yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know whether it's the same. That was when I was in London and in the US. The US, being in Florida, it's a lot different. But and in Texas, but I imagine it's just the circles you run into, because nobody would ever mock me for eating a steak or venison or moose or anything. But it's the circle that you curate. Exactly right, which is different from me now. But back then, it was different. It was definitely different. And therefore I definitely had to do my best to navigate that, for sure. But I would say that was
That was a big one. I definitely went. I have kind of an extremes attitude. So when I do something, I have to go all in. And therefore, at the time, I did kind of the carnivore edition. I did the Jordan Peterson version of it. And at the time, that was quite, that was quite difficult in the sense of the convenience and practicality when you're eating out or when you're seeing, when you're with friends or social occasions, or whatever. Like when you're just trying to order steak, like sometimes that definitely became. That definitely became quite difficult for sure. So I learned a lot. It was definitely a more spiritual battle than I thought it was going to be. And I learned a lot about myself in terms of discipline, but I learned a lot about friends and their tolerances and their patience and some interesting character traits as well. So, so it was a big learning curve for sure. It was a massive learning curve.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, it's fascinating to me again because it's not anything that I've ever dealt with. In fact, I think in my circle there's probably more of a stigma around being a vegan or a vegetarian than
that's how it should be.
Actually consuming meat.
Yeah, it should be.
I agree.
That's how it should be. That's how it should be because a lot of a lot of that rhetoric is commercially based, like now I'm realizing like a lot of the rhetoric around a lot of stuff generally tends to have its roots in kind of corporate corporate ties or corporate agendas that
sure.
help profit, and I think once you start to realize that, you're like, okay, it's like okay, the penny starts to drop for sure.
Yeah. Let's shift gears into training, physical training. I think the conventional wisdom with regards to testosterone optimization is lifting heavy. I would say, based on what I know, you tell me if I'm wrong, is between 3 to 4 days a week, you're lifting heavy. In fact, I think I saw something where you had talked about reducing the quantity of your training, but make sure it's higher quality. Yeah. But you said something else that I didn't know, and I'm interested in this, that there's actually a better correlation with improved testosterone in working your lower body relative to your upper body. I was very curious about that.
Yeah, well, most of your muscle is in your legs predominantly.
And that makes sense.
Exactly, right. And like, for instance, a lot of elite bodybuilders, when they had, like, if they had lagging upper body muscles, they would train. So for instance, let's say that they had lagging medial delts or front delts. They would save those exercises for a lower body day because of the stronger hormonal response you get from training your legs, that then translates into a better strength gains with regards to lagging muscle groups. So I know that's very common. Tom Platz and a lot of these old school guys talk very fondly about that, and I incorporate that into my own training. But also Mike Mensa, who never won Mr. Olympia, but I think he won Mr. Universe once, and he was in that circle for a while, and he pioneered what we call high intensity training, and that opened my eyes to the power of lifting with intensity and not realizing that the gains that you're seeking aren't tied to the amount of times you need to go to the gym. And what I'm now convinced in my own training and helping guys as well is, like, as long as you train with the right intensity, and what I mean by intensity is like real intensity, because a lot of men also underestimate how capable they are in terms of intensity. Like, I think most guys go to the gym and they might hit 70-80%, but very few actually like try and put themselves through like 90-100%. And if you want to go and see what 100% looks like, go and check out Tom Platz, because I feel like he trained. He was an animal, but he very much was. He opened my eyes to, like, you can train 2-3 times a week, and as long as you train with the right intensity, you can elicit the same responses and get the same benefits and get the same, whether it's hypertrophy or strength or whatever your goal is. You can get some phenomenal responses just by shifting a focus from volume to intensity, and particularly with legs. Platz famously trained his legs once every 2 weeks, and if you watch his videos, you'll see why. Because the guy, it looked like he was putting himself through some form of torture. It's nuts, but it makes you realize how much we're probably leaving on the table when we go to the gym. I really think. You think you're training hard, times it by 5, and that's probably where you need to be, So, yeah.
I think one of the problems with training 2 to 3 times a week, not that it's physiologically not good for you, it's that a lot of us, myself included, often mistake action for prudence. We think if we're moving and doing and always busy and always at the gym and always this and always that, that's actually going to be what's best for you. But when you say this, what I'm hearing you say, especially for busy men, you know, we all have lives, we have families, we have businesses, we have our own hobbies and activities. Like, you don't need to bust your ass every single day and completely just tear yourself down. Now we're just talking about being more effective and efficient with the limited time that we actually have to engage in some of these activities.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most liberating points that you make there that I love, is like, as men, aspirational men that are running businesses or leading businesses or just entrepreneurial in terms of just to have finite time, I feel like the high intensity play is so liberating, because it just means, like, if you just allocate, you know, 1, 2, 3 sessions a week, but you really hit it, like, it liberates you from having to think about having to do it every day. Like, for instance, I've had clients who've come to me. I had a client recently who trains every morning, and he'll get up at 5:30 and he'll train 5:45 till 7. And he's been struggling with libido issues. He's been struggling with sleep issues. And I'm convinced not only can you train too much, and obviously overtraining is definitely a thing, particularly in the morning. I think overtraining, you can mitigate overtraining through the time that you train, and obviously your diet, and we can go into that if you want. But overtraining is definitely a thing, particularly in the morning, because when you get up, you're training at the time that's your body's least primed, you know. And if we think about circadian health, like Huberman talks a lot about circadian biology, and the way that, you know, when you get up, you know, you need to get light, and then throughout the day, your body operates better at different points in the day, and training tends to be from kind of 12 till 4 in the afternoon. Whereas in the morning, you know, a lot of my client base, or guys I work with generally, you know, they want to try and fit it in before they work, because when they finish work, they obviously want to spend time with their wives and kids, which makes total sense. But like, from a training perspective and a results perspective, it's actually the worst time to do it. So, you know, if guys are training in the morning, you know, I tend to say don't do it fasted. I think that get some carbs down you before you train, but also I think it's better to be more mindful about intensity. Like, I think it becomes a bit more nuanced. You know, I think the high intensity play applies if you have the luxury of being able to train later in the day. But I think if you're training in the morning, particularly in the early morning, after you wake up, I think it pays to approach it in a slightly different way, for sure. So again, as I mentioned throughout this conversation, I do think it's nuanced, and in a lot of the topics or rhetorics, I do think that nuance is forgotten. Like, you know, someone watching a podcast, whatever it might be, might think, oh, I need to train really intensely in the morning, whatever it might be. It's like, well, there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs wherever you go, whichever way you do it. And I think it's just understanding what they are. And I think it's sometimes hard to find that. It is sometimes hard to find that.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically saying that, hey, the way, Ryan, you're doing it, don't do it like that, because I train every day in the morning, fasted.
Okay, right.
If I eat something, I usually, when I'm training, because I try to go as hard as I can. I'm sure I'm not hitting it at 90 or 100%, but I try. I feel like I'm going to puke. But I also think there's other reasons outside of hormone optimization or physique optimization. You know, maybe that's the only time you can go. Or exactly. Like you said, you know, if you're saying, hey, go train from 12 to 4, but that just doesn't either work for your schedule, or you know you're just not going to do it, then I would say morning is better than nothing.
Absolutely. But I agree. And also, I do think, again, as men, I think there's a case to be made for, like, you know, just get up and just do it, you know, and
exactly.
I think we can get to, you know, people like Brian Johnson and a lot of the health rhetoric can be very neurotic, you know, and I think we need to be careful of that. Like, I think it was like, you know, just do it. But I think if you're, in your case, I think having some honey or some sugar, literally some sugar or some fruit juice before you train, rather than train fasted, have some fruit-based carbs or honey or maple syrup, I think would make a huge difference. I really do. And a little bit of salt as well, like quarter teaspoon, half a teaspoon of salt, would make a huge difference, just because cortisol levels tend to spike early in the morning, about 7 a.m. And what you run the risk of doing is, if you don't have a little bit of sustenance, particularly from carb, and the reason I'm stressing carb is because protein and fats take a lot longer to digest, and therefore when you have protein or fat before you train, you risk the blood supply being allocated to your digestion as opposed to your limbs, which is where you need them to obviously train. Whereas carbs, particularly sugars, maple syrups, honeys, are metabolized really quickly, and therefore your body can almost utilize it like, rocket fuel. But what it
Say that one more time. So the proteins and the fats are processed where versus the carbs to your limbs?
Most proteins, again, it depends on the type of protein or fat, but generally speaking, proteins and fats take anywhere from 2 to 5 hours to digest. Like fish is a lot easier, whereas like a pork can take 5 hours. So the notion that you should eat before, like particularly a protein shake, I think a protein shake before training is not wise. Let's just say that.
Pointless is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Like I think it's wise to have fruit, some form of carb source, because within the context of hormone optimization, particularly in the morning, you run the risk of if you run it fasted, you can burn yourself out, because what you can then do is then artificially spike cortisol more than it should be. And then if you compound that over time, you're going to find that you're going to plateau more. You might find that you're going to get weaker. You might find that in the afternoon you get like energy, like drops in energy. You'll start to feel these symptoms. You're like, oh, that's strange, but I'm doing everything right. I'm eating well. I'm training, and I do find the devil is usually in the details. And I've had a few examples of guys that do that, train in the morning 5 to 7 times a week, and then when we introduce some carbs before they train, and I get them to use a halogen bulb. So sometimes if the sun isn't up, I get them to buy a halogen reptile bulb. They shine it not directly in their face, but kind of to the side of their face, and it acts as kind of a form of sunlight. It's very similar to sunlight without it being sunlight. And what that does is it tells your body, right, it's morning, let's get going. It sends a positive hormonal cascade. And so that, in addition to the bit of salt and the sugar, just helps mitigate any potential negative detrimental impacts that can come from training consistently in the morning, particularly early in the morning. I think if it's 8 or 9 o'clock, that's a bit different. But if it's 6, 7, you just run that risk a little bit.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to incorporate that. I also know anecdotally, just overtraining just wears your body down. I had an injury several years ago. I ruptured my pec, complete rupture, and part of it was just doing something dumb at jiu-jitsu. But the other part is that my body was just beat down, and I wasn't lifting so much at the time, but I was doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. My body was just worn out, and I knew it was. I'd go and I'd train, and I was lethargic and tired and low energy, and I would still train because that's what you're quote unquote supposed to do. And then I ended up hurting myself through a combination of being dumb and arrogant and just my body being beat down. Exactly.
And I think that's, again, you make a great case for the whole no pain, no gain. Well, it's like I challenge that, because it's like, it's no pain, no gain if you're coming from a good foundation. If you're well and you're healthy and you're vital, fine, hit it, because you've got the foundation for it. But if you're fragile and you've got niggling issues, in my mind, if you've got niggling issues or you've got vulnerabilities, your nervous system's clearly overburdened. And to me, that suggests some what we call sympathetic dominance in the nervous system. And in that case, you have to train according to what you feel like your body's. It comes back to intuition, because what you say there, in my mind, if I was you, it's like, okay, cool. My body's trying to tell me maybe I'm not as primed as I should be, and why is that? Maybe I'm overexerting myself. How can I help correct that? It's like maybe I reduce the frequency, maybe I reduce the intensity, maybe I look at my nutrition and make sure that I'm getting the right micronutrients. Do you know what I mean? There's a whole myriad of what I call pillars, these things that underpin our vitality, and it's just making sure that they're on song in terms of they're all dialed in the way that it should be. And invariably, if you're seeing the context that you described there, it's like maybe there's obviously something a bit off, and
right.
But yeah, so.
Well, and I think, one of the things, and I think this is pretty conventional. Most people at this point, I think, probably know, if they're somewhat in tune with their health, is how important sleep is. So I don't want to hit too much on that, because I do want to hit on a subject that I think is often overlooked. But when it comes to sleep, maybe very briefly, what is optimal, not only because you talk about quality over quantity in sleep as well. So I'd like to hit on that and then move into one other thing I wanted to address.
Yeah. So I find a lot of the rhetoric, which I find frustrating, is it's like, oh, you need to sleep 7 hours or 8 hours. And you hear that repetitive, you know, that's grilled in,
Right.
like everyone's saying 7, 8 hours, 7, 8 hours. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, well, that assumes that everyone's coming from the same pre-bed hygiene. Like it's so basic, and it lacks so much, like, in terms of the quality. What that misses is the quality play around, okay, well, given that we know that light environments can impact melatonin levels by 80%, like they've proven LED lights and fluorescent lights can suppress melatonin production by 80 to 40%, then the duration play I'm very skeptical of, on the basis that really depends on it really depends on your environment with regards to, particularly with light. Again, that can also come into if you eat late as well. Like eating late can impact sleep, but particularly light. And in most households, we've got fluorescent and LED lights that have got a lot of artificial blue light.
Everywhere.
Exactly. They are everywhere. Exactly. And they've even made incandescent halogen bulbs in the US illegal now. So the things that you should replace it with and help yourself, they made it illegal. Yeah.
Sounds about par for the course.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. I agree. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of quality, because it's like, if you optimize for quality, then in myself and guys I work with, like they'll sleep 5-6 hours and they'll feel like they've slept 7 or 8, because they've got their light environment and they've eaten at the right time beforehand, and therefore they haven't suppressed melatonin production. And therefore, if you're not suppressing melatonin production by 40 to 80%, you think you're sleeping well. You wait until you optimize your light environment and you put blue light blockers on and you use red lights, or even better, like candles, or you wait to how good you'll sleep if you get that right, because you'll feel superhuman on much less sleep. And I think, again, that's lost in a lot of the rhetoric. It's always duration, because it's so simplistic, whereas actually it's not. It's, let's optimize for quality, make sure that we're doing that right, and then everything else will look after itself.
Yeah, I think I found, for me, the biggest thing, I read an article or saw something, and it was to get rid of all the light in your room, every light. And so I went through on, my TV, my computer, I've got a dashboard here, I've got all these things here that I would unplug everything or put a little piece of electrical tape. I've got a power surge here. It's got a little power button. It's red. I put a little piece of electrical tape over everything. And the first night, it was just pitch black. I actually had to get up during the middle of the night and stumbled all over everything, stubbed my toe on my bed and door frame and everything else. But it was that dark. And then the other thing that really was helpful is sleeping cold. And I don't know if there's science behind that, but I've seen some things. I set my thermostat to about 68 at night, and my fan's going, and it's cold. Like it is objectively cold in my room when I'm sleeping, but I feel like I sleep so much better when I do it that way. For sure.
And I do think it depends on like latitude, like in the nutrition debate. I don't think latitude's given enough credit in terms of like, and the same with sleep. Like it's hard to sleep cold if you live on the equator. So it's like, how come people are sleeping well on the equator who are also sleeping well in northern latitudes where it's cold? Like if it was as simple as it's good to sleep cold, it's like, well, what do you do if you're on the equator? Do you know what I mean? I just find, as a guy that's passionate about the nuance, to me, and it's the same with nutrition. It's like, oh, do keto. It's like, well, if you're living in the equator and you've got equatorial genetics, they've never done keto because they have very little fat on the equator because there's lots of sun. So again, it's like and so I do think there's nuance with regards to where, if you're depending on your genetic makeup, blah, 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 etc. So, and the same can be said for, tips like that. I do think in some cases, maybe as white Caucasian men that have northern latitudes, we do better in cold environments because that's where our ancestry was from. But it may be different for someone that's, from...
Interesting.
Do you know what I mean? So that's how I look at it. And so I do think, that works for some people. I have clients that try 8 sleep and they tend to send it back because it doesn't get them the results they think, but that's a very popular one.
What is 8 sleep? Is that the mattress or something?
Yeah, it's a mat you put down.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard some interesting anecdotes on that for sure. But I think generally speaking, mouth tape, to encourage nasal breathing is a huge one. Particularly given
I tried that and almost died one night. It felt like I woke up and I was like choking on my own saliva. I'm like, normally I must drool all over because I'm like, plus the facial hair isn't really conducive to putting a bunch of tape over my mouth.
No, so. I know. Well, if you wake up with a dry mouth, or you snore, or if you know that you snore, that's usually a good indicator that you're mouth breathing. And if you've got
know I
forward
do
head
snore.
posture, oh, you do snore. Okay.
I do snore. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe that could be an indicator of mouth breathing.
I'll try it again. I might have to wrap it around my whole head so it stays on, but I'm willing to give it another try.
Well, it does work. I think what I would say on that is obviously it depends. If you've got forward head posture, if you can't do mouth taping and you have issues with that, maybe you have a posture issue. That's
I do.
preventing.
My head. I know that my head kind of tucks back like
I'm
this.
the same.
Yeah.
Well, mine's forward. I'm trying to correct at the moment, and I know that because I snore, and sometimes the mouth tape sometimes works for me, but sometimes it doesn't, and I'm convinced because I end up sleeping on my back, and because my pillow gets stuck, it pushes my head forward, which then restricts the airways. So my body's like, we need to get air.
We need more air here.
Exactly. So I do think it depends, but mouth tape, like you say in your case, like for some people to sleep, you can get a heavy duvet. Can sometimes help as well, like getting an air filter, having the window open. I think is a huge one, or getting a HEPA air filter that you can get that goes on during the night is going to really help. And getting all your food by 7 p.m. I think that's a big one. I think a lot of people tend to eat too late, but also topical magnesium chloride. In the supplement I recommend. Guys, and obviously I'm not medical, so this isn't advice, but I do find in my own experience that topical magnesium chloride that you douse on your shoulders and neck makes a huge difference to just helping you feel calm and relaxed. And to some degree, inositol has definitely helped me massively. So there's definitely, I know Huberman talks about epigenin, or you've got magnesium L-threonate, and you've got there's loads of sleep supplements out there, and
I'm sure
there's a real minefield, but it's hard to figure out sometimes what really works, but usually it's the basics. It's just
the other thing I wanted to address, and this is one that I've seen and heard about, and anecdotally, I can see how this makes sense to improve testosterone naturally, is the idea of competing with other men and specifically winning. I think I've seen studies that suggest that not only is competition important, but winning for men is important. And just the act of winning a competition will actually boost, I don't know how long that's sustainable, but will actually, in the short term at least, boost testosterone levels. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's also, I've seen some studies where a man's testosterone will actually dictate the hormonal profiles of his spouse, his wife, and his children. In terms of it almost is like the way, and I don't know whether that could easily be. It could easily be a case of how as men, how we exert ourselves, and then the kind of consequent ways in which that's kind of computed by the feminine or kids. But I've definitely
one alone, I think, would be, this is something I've seen a lot of guys, and they might overreact to certain situations. But if a man can be emotionally stable, then obviously that's going to reduce cortisol levels in his wife.
Exactly.
So, that's a small example right there of how that physiological would work.
Exactly. And I'd make a strong case for, if your hormones are optimized, as a man, you shouldn't be reacting really to anything, because it shows weakness in the sense of that thing has power over us, right? So I found the higher my testosterone and the more healthy I become, the more desensitized I've become to things that would otherwise try and trigger me, or try and provoke me in a way. And I think you'll find that when you start, like you said, training with other men, I think having a brotherhood, generally speaking, is phenomenal, not only for accountability, and it can be physical accountability in terms of, in your case, jiu-jitsu or whatever, but also emotional accountability. We're living in this world where as men, we're being conditioned that vulnerability is strength. And I think I definitely challenge that on the basis that I think as men it's important to be vulnerable, but I think it's important to be vulnerable with other men, as opposed to your wife or your girlfriend.
Sure.
That's not the domain to do it, and therefore I actually think we have a huge deficiency in brotherhood and men that can hold space for difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And I think desperately we need to create or have or actively seek ways in which we can find men that we can do that with, because I think there's a huge shortage, and there's a reason why, you know, male suicides is the biggest killer in men below 45, and I think there's a reason why, you know, men tend to suffer more from some mood disorders as well. And it's because we are isolated and we feel like we can't chat. And I think, you know, we just need to find the right men to be able to deal with, and that's difficult. I empathize with guys in that because it's difficult to find that.
Yeah. Well, Simmo, I really appreciate this, man. There's been a lot of good insight here, and I'm sure you've got so much more to share. There's even a few pointers that I've taken away that, and this is something that I try to focus on. I'm not optimized by any means what I say, but there's a few pointers in here that I think I can implement in my own life that I imagine will show improvement. If men have listened to this and they're interested in learning more about what you do, more about your information, more about what you offer, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, just my Twitter at your Simmo on my Twitter. That's the best way to find me.
Yeah, that's how I found you, and that's how I was recommended. So a lot of good stuff on Twitter, and then you have a newsletter too that comes out. Is that every week that it comes out? Or
yeah, it's meant to be every week. At the moment, it's not as consistent as that. But yeah,
I get that. I definitely understand that. Well, good. Well, we'll sync everything up. Yeah, we'll sync it all up so the guys know where to go. Brother, I appreciate you, man. I'm looking forward to maybe more conversations in the future and implementing some of this stuff for me and also some of the guys that listen. So thanks for taking your time with us today.
Likewise. Cheers, Ryan. Thanks.